So we're going to go ahead and get started. Alan Ozuna is our EDC attorney. He's done a lot of work in the municipal field and is really our expert, but we're going to allow Alan to just kind of go over the judge's order a little bit. And that way, if you all have any questions, I know some of you have called in and have asked us some things about what's going on and how it may impact your business. And so this is an opportunity for you all to at least hear from our legal guy, his opinion on the order, and then and how it could impact you, and maybe how we can continue to do business. All right, Alan, go ahead.
Certainly, thank you, Rodell. Okay, as Rodell said, I had looked at the county judge's order, and by the way, if you haven't seen a copy of the order, you should go to the county website and you can download it from there. The one that's in operation right now is the one called Third Supplemental Emergency Management Order with Mandatory Countywide Shelter in Place. You may have seen a couple of other drafts circulating around before the judge issued and signed this one. This is the one that's in effect. The only difference between some of the earlier drafts is that this one added some provisions that prohibited or postponed foreclosures and evictions. They weren't going to take place anyway because all the courts that would hear those things are shut down. But the order in terms of other operations defines a few categories of activity that are accepted from any kind of mandatory shutdown or closure or inside order, and they basically fall into categories what the order refers to as either essential personal activities, healthcare operation services, essential infrastructure operations, essential government functions, and essential businesses. Now, between the essential personal activities and the essential businesses, my reading of this is that it pretty much allows business as usual in terms of operations for most things that people leave their houses for and engage in activity outside their house for, subject to some social distancing requirements, which are covered at the end of the order. And they basically, like we've been hearing on the news, imposing 6-foot minimum distances, frequent hand washing, covering one's face when coughing or sneezing, and no handshaking. That's the gist of the social distancing requirements. And then the order goes in to define a number of categories that are accepted from anything that might be interpreted as an absolute shutdown or an absolute order to stay home. And as I said, they're mainly contained in terms of private businesses, private activity. In the first category, essential personal activities, and the the sixth category, essential businesses. Despite that terminology, essential business, if you read through it, you'll find a number of things that are subject to debate as to whether or not they'd be considered absolutely essential in a time of crisis. So one thing that struck me, for example, is that restaurants are specifically not shut down, but their activity is basically closing the dining rooms and allowing for drive-through or carry-out or curbside services only. There is a cap on operation of those businesses or restaurants rather. 10 p.m. is the cutoff time. And unlike the Hidalgo County order, I'm not reading any kind of curfew or 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. travel restrictions. That may come later. It's not contained in this order as far as I can see. But I encourage you to kind of read through them, rather than just kind of read every single item that's in there. I think it's essential to kind of read through and figure out whether anything that you're engaged in might fall into one or more of those categories, and you'll identify a number of sort of overlapping provisions here that most businesses will meet. And most businesses will fall into categories that are covered by a number of different provisions here. For any business that is somehow not covered, or can't figure out a way to pigeonhole operation into one of these essential functions, you're still allowed to operate, but you're under a restriction called that the order calls minimum basic operations, and that's basically only getting only those employees that are necessary to do things like inventory and Social Security, process payroll and employee benefits, or similar type functions. And of course, those must, any employee who's engaging in that type of activity must meet the minimum social distancing requirements. Those are the social distancing requirements are applicable for any kind of operation here that's described or accepted in the order. So probably the easiest way to kind of address whether or not activity is covered would be to kind of throw it open for questions. And like Rydell said, I'm representing the EDC. I'm not here to say that my interpretation is the only legal interpretation of this order. I'm sort of just rendering my opinion for Rydell, which he is wanting to share with folks. And so whatever I'm saying here is for that purpose only. So does anyone have any specific issue they'd like addressed, or anything you read that strikes you as inexplicable or needing some clarification?
I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the calls that I had. For example, I had a call about people that are actually going back and forth from work and how they should be handled. So would that be? I'm sorry, somebody else is talking? No, so how do they handle, employees that are working, say, during the time period from 12 to 5?
Right. The way I intend to handle this, because I've got some to and from business meetings and governmental meetings that I've got to do myself, and to the extent that I don't have any information on how the county intends to enforce this, but to the extent that enforcement involves being stopped by a deputy sheriff or a constable or a police officer or an agent of the Department of Public Safety, my best guess is to explain, have the person who so stops to explain to the law enforcement official what you do, why you're traveling, and how it ties into whatever essential business operation or essential personal activity you are about when you're going to and from. And again, the activity could fall into a number of categories here. They're pretty broad. The personal activities would cover things like going to the store to buy food. I know that there was some talk about the shutdown involving things like nail salons and haircutting places. You could interpret some of these activities here under personal activities as even permitting those. But that's the way I intend to handle it, is basically if I get questioned as to why I'm out and about, to say, well, I'm on my way to a city council meeting, and we're performing essential governmental functions in response to the emergency, or I'm on my way to the irrigation district meeting, who are involved in protection of the infrastructure and that kind of thing. So if you're in a business that you've identified how your business falls into essential business, because you're in food service, you're in gas station, you're in plumbing, landscaping, anything like that, is to explain, I'm on my way to do this thing. It's an essential function. Maybe even keep a copy of the order with you, or they have the employees keep a copy of the order with the essential business circle, saying, this is what I'm on my way to do. I see that some questions are coming in on the chat. I can address those, Rydell, or if you want to introduce them and or ask any specific questions.
Sure. Somebody started sharing the screen. I didn't put any restrictions on it, but anyway, there's one that came in, broadly speaking, is the manufacturing industry okay to operate, or just certain manufacturing sectors? Transportation, warehousing, and logistics are exempted to support cross-border trade, correct? Question mark.
I mean, that's the way I read it. Again, these exceptions are so broad that almost nothing is prohibited. Right. Transportation is specifically mentioned in the order. Warehousing and logistics are support services that are specifically mentioned in the order.
Is this a marketing call?
And so, you know, those kinds of things are
And I thought it was somebody else. I'm right in the middle of the meeting. I'm sorry, I can't take it.
All right. Any other questions? Any concerns?
There were some questions in the chat box. And
I only see the one that was read about
I've only
the
saw
manufacturing
one.
and-
I have had no luck getting through to any particular problem. No one answers the phone. And their website still shows that's the county judge.
All right. I think that I don't hear any
I thought
other
I heard-
questions. Oh,
I thought I
here.
heard someone speaking in the background. Oh, here we go. I see another question. Companies who are suppliers of goods and services to manufacturing would be okay to operate. Again, there are specific exceptions for support services that would cover that question generally. I think also you could look to the nature of the manufacturing to figure out whether that manufacturing fits into one of the categories that are exempted, like essential operating essential businesses, or maybe even involved in essential government operations. And so you have this sort of derivative exception that applies to those suppliers of goods and services to the essential business. And you know, in terms of having your employees travel for that, I think identifying not only what the employee is doing, but also what essential business is being supported by that employee's activity will be something that an employee can do if you know, questioned as to why the employee is out and about. The social distancing stuff still needs to be adhered to, you know, in terms of the employees traveling and in terms of the employees doing the activity at whatever job site or whatever, you know, customer destination they're going to go to. And so keep that in mind.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, our business, we do service, and we are not a key one supplier, but I have customers, they do medical, they do industry. Do I qualify to be open, or I should be worried about it?
I think that falls into that category of support services for otherwise essential businesses, which it sounds like in your case would be both essential business and healthcare operation services that your industry would then be supporting. Now, like I said, there's no real indication here the way this is going to get enforced. I mean, other than at the end talking about how it's enforced with a fine or a confinement in jail. That tells me that if anybody, well, and there's a specific enforcement section that talks about the sheriffs, constables, chiefs of police having the ability to ensure compliance. The enforcement personnel that you may encounter, you know, may or may not have read this order. They may receive specific instructions from their supervisors or sergeants or chiefs. And so there's a world of possibilities in terms of the way this could get applied by the boots on the ground in terms of you know, dealing with anybody who might be out and about service, you know, providing the essential services or operating essential businesses. I mean, I think that the best way to handle that, and my way I tend to handle it as I'm out and about, is you know, certainly obey the man who's got a gun on his hip first, and then you know, fight about it in court later. And so this is my reading of you know, I think that the county judge's intent is behind the issuance of this order. The fact that it doesn't contain a lot of really heavy duty provisions like we're seeing in other jurisdictions where it's absolutely closing down businesses or absolutely prohibiting travel or imposing curfews or anything like that. None of that is contained in here. There are specific exceptions that are very broad that provide continued avenues to do a lot of sort of normal activity. And so I think it will be easy for folks to find, one or more slots into which to fit their businesses and still operate legally and normally, as long as you obey the social justice, social distancing minimums. It seems like my feeling is that we should be fine.
There's a couple other questions that came in. One was, would the hotels that are still operable be affected by this order?
There are specific exceptions for hotels in here. I didn't circle it. I recall seeing it. Generally, legally, even in the absence of an emergency, your hotel room is considered your domicile. Your temporary domicile for the purposes of most constitutional principles. And so being in a hotel room would not by itself be a violation of any provision in here. As far as the operation of the hotel, I'm trying to find where I saw a specific reference to those things being open, as long as they were adhering to the social distancing and sanity requirements here. Let's see. I know it's in here. I saw it in here, but again, that's my reading, is that they're still good to go.
And what about like companies that work for these manufacturers? Like we do crane work, but we also do, work for the manufacturers, moving in stuff, moving out stuff, are we able to still be working?
It sounds like that activity would fall under this support services exemption, the supplier and support services exemption, which I've got a lot of questions about that. Let me find it and read out the specific exceptions. They would all be under Section 6, essential businesses, down around the small Roman numeral 15, 16, 17, where the order accepts business products needed for people to work from home, businesses that supply other essential businesses with the support or supplies necessary to operate, businesses that ship or deliver groceries, food directly to residences. There's a lot of those activities that are in furtherance of allowing other essential businesses to operate, appear to be also accepted in that kind of derivative fashion that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
So it looks like they would be good to go. So
There was a question about. There was another question about call centers and whether they were able to operate. I know that there's some discussions offline with some of these call centers. Mike, you asked that they're, serving insurance and financial sectors, and some of those are, some of them are not. And so we're kind of working through that. There's some concerns from some of the healthcare industry about some of these call centers because they do pack a lot of people into small spaces. And so we're working through that.
I think that's going to be the most sort of arduous part of the call center's continued operation. There are a number of exceptions that would apply to the business itself, but imposing the social distancing requirement might be more difficult just because of the way those businesses are set up. I think it's going to be incumbent upon individual businesses like that to physically impose those separations, move equipment around, station people further apart than normal. Like I said, it sounds like that might be an arduous task depending on how it's set up. But to the extent that law enforcement comes around to check, or that one of the employees engaged in that activity would make a complaint, that's how the enforcement would happen there. So the social distancing stuff is applicable across the board, whether you're essential or non-essential, whether you're medical or governmental. It's just one of the things that's going to have to be in place.
All right. Many are serving HHS and government functions. That's correct. And if they are exempt from the order.
Right. Whether healthcare, government functions, or other other essential businesses, and I heard somebody talk about insurance, and that could fall into the professional services category, or itself be a support for some other business. I don't think that the county is interested in defining the length of that chain of derivative exception here. In other words, if you support a business that supports another business that supports another business, as long as you can get to an essential business somewhere down the road, my reading is that it's probably covered, and the intent was probably to have it be accepted. And I know that I didn't see the whole of the county judge's press conference on it, but the comments that I did see seem to indicate, and the language that I'm reading here seems to indicate that there wasn't a real desire to kind of shut most things down, but a strong desire to make sure that the social distancing requirements were enforced and obeyed, and that's the way that the county intends to for the spread of the virus.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening in. Hopefully that helped answer a few questions. As always, we're here to help. If you guys have any questions, give us a call. You call our office numbers. All our phones are transferred over to our cell phones. So we may not be in the office, although some of us are. Tanya and Marianne are there. But we'll definitely respond to you all very quickly. So thank you all for being here, and take care.